Welcome to Nostalgia Marcana. I'm your host, Doug Leaf. Each episode of this podcast, we will look back on the pop cultural ephemera that remains in our cultural zeitgeist today and try to understand why we remain enchanted all these years later. This week, we will be revisiting Normally for this podcast, I will go back and revisit the subject in question to bone up, refresh my memory of it. I did not have to do it for this week's topic because, man, did I put in the hours when I was 12. We are talking about Street Fighter II, a video game that is near and dear to my video gaming heart. We haven't done a video game thing on this podcast before, but I do love them a whole bunch, and I'm sure we'll be talking about video games here and there as we go along. But I thought this is a great place to start, and it was suggested by this week's guest. He is returning to the podcast, our first return guest. He is a performer at Westside Comedy Theater. He also teaches improv. Just go to richbakercoaching.com, and you'll find him there. So please welcome to the podcast from
USA,
Rich Baker.
Yeah, nice voiceover there. USA. Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me back, Doug. It's a pleasure the last time, and I'm excited about this topic.
I think it's a great topic. Why don't you talk a little bit about why you picked it?
It was, I have so many memories, but I'd say I logged more hours playing this video game than any other video game, maybe Mario Kart. I did more, maybe. But this one was one of my most played, loved it. It went from an arcade obsession to a Super Nintendo obsession to an excuse to have your friends over. Let's have a Street Fighter II tournament, to the movie, which was a flop. But then I look back on it, I'm like, actually, it's kind of fun for what it is. And, all the iterations of Street Fighter that have come out and all that kind of stuff.
I really enjoyed the hell out of this game when it came out, and it's not what I usually go for in a game. I think for me as a kid, I was usually way more into something that had a narrative, which this game doesn't really have. I would want to go on a quest in a video game. This is a tournament fighter, and we'll spend some time talking about, just for people who don't know, what the nuts and bolts of Street Fighter 2 is. But yeah, I just, everybody had this game, right? You mentioned you fell in love with it on arcades, and then it came out on Super Nintendo. It came out on everything. The thing was a monster hit. This was think of, Titanic in terms of movies. It was that level of a blockbuster for video games.
Yeah, I'd say I would compare it to The Simpsons in that they licensed Street Fighter 2 for everything, right? There were Street Fighter 2 toothbrushes and Street Fighter 2 cereal and Street Fighter 2 board games. It was so popular, you could just slap the logo on anything and it would sell.
Yeah, I was looking at Wikipedia, according to Wikipedia, the game itself, not counting that other merch you just mentioned, but iterations of this game sold in arcades and on every console imaginable totaled $10 billion for just one game.
Wow.
It was it's one of the highest grossing games of all time. Very few things approach it. Maybe there was recent Grand Theft Auto, I think.
Yeah. Did
that kind of business recently, but this was in 1992.
Yeah. It was definitely Capcom's biggest game, even comparing it to the later iterations, like that original Street Fighter II Super Nintendo, outsold everything else Capcom had ever done or would do.
And continue to hold that record for Capcom for a long time. And Capcom is no slouch as a video game developer. They had many other franchises before and after this, in particular, the Mega Man series.
Huge fan of Mega Man.
Right. Me too. The Resident Evil series is also Capcom's. So they've had more than hell yeah. Woo! That game is huge. They had all these Disney platformers that they did. So Capcom's still around, still going strong. But this title is huge. I guess we should probably start. Maybe we want to explain a little about what Street Fighter 2 is for those who haven't played it.
Yeah, well, just the game itself was the first real game of any major popularity where you could play against your friend in a versus mode and be able to select from a large swath of characters to do so. Like, they had games where you could play against each other, but this was like you could pick one of 8 people, they could pick one of 8 people, and you go, and then you could even pick where you were. And so, there were fighters from Japan and China and the US and Brazil, and all these different characters that had their own backstories, which was kind of new for that style of game at that point. And then there were 4 bosses. If you beat all 8, then you went to Balrog, Vega, Sagat, and then M. Bison, who was the big bad guy, and you beat him, you beat the game.
Yeah, it's a very simple game at its core, right? It's deceptively simple, but all it is essentially each round of the game is a boxing match. You pick your fighter. Each fighter has a unique set, well, with one exception we'll talk about. But each fighter has a unique set of moves and attributes, right? So some of them are fast and they don't do much, but they don't do much damage. Other guys hit hard, but they're slow. And they have, maybe some of them throw projectiles. Maybe some of them can do these unusual magical things.
Some can jump higher than others, that kind of thing.
Right. So you found one that you felt like playing for that moment that fit your playstyle. You would fight in a 2D plane against this other person in a best of 3 in these timed rounds, and you'd have a little bar at the top of the screen, and each hit you took would take yellow off of that bar, and when it was all gone, you lost that round.
Yeah.
Or if time ran out, whoever had more of it remaining won the round. That's all it is, right? On the surface, that's all you do. But this game got remade over and over, and not just different editions of the game, but this birthed a genre, right? So you get Mortal Kombat, you get Killer Instinct, you get all of these games down the line, and it just seems like
Primal Rage, Tekken, all that came from this.
And for the last 30 years, they've basically been trying to recapture the lightning in a bottle that is Street Fighter 2.
But they've had a real longevity, just like, not to skip ahead, but, one thing that this birthed was a competitive gaming in a way that still exists. The fighter game genre is still one of the most popular things that fills stadiums watching gamers beat the hell out of each other. Capcom versus Marvel or whatever the game is, Super Smash Brothers, etc.
Yeah, definitely this did a lot to birth the world of competitive gaming. Yeah. I can remember seeing kids standing around one of these machines in an arcade while you watch these 2 kids go at it, and you're just watching it in awe of, like, how do they pull off this stuff? Like, they're so good. And it comes down to, like, a real mastery of, like, understanding the timing of each character's moveset and the animations. So, the people that were really good could, like, you'd kick your opponent and he'd go flying, and you would throw a fireball, time that so that as this guy came down the arc of his parabola, he'd hit the fireball on the way down and get damaged again. Yeah. Right? People who could master that shit and never take a hit and just wipe the floor with everyone.
I was I think 9 when the arcade game came out near me, and a lot of the kids were playing were like teenagers, preteens, that kind of stuff, and I didn't know what I was doing, so I'd wait in line. It was a long line, which was not a thing at arcades. Like, you didn't wait in line typically for a game like that, but winner stayed, loser paid. And so I'd get up there and I'd play some 16-year-old, and I'd just mash the hell out of the buttons and get my ass kicked, and then I would just do it over and over and over until I got a little bit good. And I remember the longest streak I ever had at the arcade was 4 wins in a row. I was the most proud person on the planet.
Well, there are people that would devote an insane amount of quarters or time to this, and especially once it came out on home consoles, where you didn't have to keep dropping in more quarters. You could spend forever mastering these 8 and then 12 characters.
Yeah.
Did you have, I know we'll probably talk about each character individually, but did you have one that was your favorite?
Yeah, I loved all the characters. I played through the game with all the characters, but the one that I would say, like, if you wanted to play me and I'm like, okay, I bring my A game, the character that feels the most right to me is E Honda.
E Honda, the sumo wrestler.
The sumo wrestler, yeah, who's shirtless and his home's in a bathhouse and.
Yeah, each of the fighters has their own unique stage that's like their home turf that you would play in, and it was fun. They were fairly detailed for the time in terms of their sprite work, and they'd have these fun little things going on in the background. The backgrounds were not interactable, though. That would come in later editions of games like this, where like you could grab something in the environment and throw it.
Yeah,
like a wrestler grabbing a chair.
Which I think if my memory serves correct, I don't know if you, but I think that Mortal Kombat did that first, and Street Fighter goes, "Oh, we'll take that." Like, these games borrowed from each other, and still do.
Yeah. And Mortal Kombat is the Pepsi to Street Fighter 2's Coca-Cola.
100%. Yeah.
Or maybe a better example would be like Street Fighter 2 is the Beatles, and Mortal Kombat's the Rolling Stones, and they kind of like challenge each other.
Yeah.
As these franchises go on. But Mortal Kombat would iterate way more than Street Fighter. I think we're up to like Street Fighter 6 is about to come out.
Yeah.
And Mortal Kombat's up to like 11 main games, and they just kept churning that shit out. But one thing that Street Fighter 2 I think has over Mortal Kombat was, yes, Mortal Kombat was violent, and that was kind of cool. But the moves in Mortal Kombat were very hard to execute.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Street Fighter was much more accessible. It's like, okay, it's very easy to perform all of these special moves. It's just mastering them and knowing when to use them. That's the challenge. In Mortal Kombat, it was literally like, wait, what buttons do I press to make this happen?
Yeah. The gameplay, definitely. And then, Mortal Kombat, like, I loved it, but it was, Street Fighter was bright and cartoony and funny. And Mortal Kombat was dark and scary and heavy. And, like, they're both cool, but, like, I was much more in the mood to play, bright and shiny than dark and heavy more often than not.
This definitely had more of a vibe of like, I can just pick this up and play through a tournament in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Just take the time to just run through this gauntlet of dudes in an afternoon and just have a good time. Like it kind of has that appeal that something like Tetris has, where it's like, I'll just pick this up and play it for a little while. I don't have to really invest much, and it's light and breezy, like you said.
Yeah.
Have you ever played Street Fighter 1?
You know what? I seen it, like I've YouTubed it just because I think like 10 years ago I was curious, like, hey, if there's Street Fighter 2, was there for Street Fighter 1? But I never encountered I never remember seeing the arcade. I don't remember anything about it. Like what I saw on YouTube felt completely new to me when I watched it.
Same. I decided to watch a little of it to prep for this podcast because I was like, I've never actually even seen one frame of it. I don't know what it looks like.
Yeah.
And it's a similar concept in terms of like you have these rounds of martial arts of one guy against the other, but instead of being able to pick from a roster of 8 or 12 people, you're just one character. You're Ryu or Ken, who are in this game. They carried over from that original one, but basically, though, it's like Mario and Luigi. They're the exact same character with different visuals. It's are you wearing a red gi or are you wearing a white gi?
Yeah.
And then you fight this roster full of dudes that seemed completely just non-memorable in any way.
Yeah.
And not as interesting combat. It looked a little slower and clunkier in terms of how it moved.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing that carried over from it was Sagat. That character was the main boss of the original one.
Well, yeah, and the interesting thing that I didn't know is apparently the arcade game, the first version of it, instead of having 6 buttons, they had 3 buttons that were pressure sensitive. So, like, you could hit light, medium, or hard based on how you pushed it, but, like, they would wear out so quick that they replaced it with the 6-button setup that they would copy over for Street Fighter 2 later.
Yeah, and in the game, you have 6 buttons that correspond to light, medium, and hard kicks and punches.
Yep.
And then certain combinations would execute a special move, like, say, the classic one, the Haduoken fireball that Ryu throws. If you press down and do a quarter turn to the left or right, followed by I think medium punch or whatever it was, he would throw a fireball. And all the moves are like that. You execute a fairly simple little flourish of buttons and it unleashes something more interesting than your average kick or punch.
Which was, I feel like the Street Fighter 1 was makes so much sense looking back, just because the gap between Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and Street Fighter 2. Because, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, like, every move was basically one button, and then, it was up and down versus side to side. And then so Street Fighter took those, and Street Fighter 2 took like the best of all that and then made it something damn near perfect for a video game.
Yeah, Punch-Out is worth mentioning, which I think a lot of people played Mike Tyson's Punch-Out on NES, where, like you said, it's a different perspective in terms of the view, but also the challenge of Punch-Out is all about mastering timing. That, all of your enemies are basically these timing puzzles, and you're there to figure out when's my window of opportunity to dodge and then punch or block to defeat these guys. And this is a little more free form. It's not so much about, they don't have like an individual set of like memorizable patterns that they do. But the big innovation is, as you said, is going from having this one fighter to being able to pick from this roster of initially 8 and then 12 guys. It gave this feeling of like almost like the video game version of playing with your action figures. It's like, oh, okay, because if you had a bunch of like Star Wars action figures, you'd be like, okay, you be Darth Vader and I'll be Han Solo or whatever, and then you put them down. Okay, I'm going to be Chewie and you be Princess Leia or whatever, and that's what this lets you do.
Yeah, 100%. No, and that was the fun part. Was like once you owned the game, you could spend the time to master all the fighters if you wanted to, which, I mean, I most people I know at least dabbled in all the other characters as opposed to just finding one. But on the arcade, because you only had one shot at it, it cost you a quarter every time, you usually just kind of picked one character to try and challenge whoever the winner was. And I loved, getting, because that was a big difference, when the Super Nintendo game came out, which I think was the first console version of the Street Fighter 2, is that it actually told you the moves in the instruction booklet. So it's like the secret was out.
Yeah, what's really smart about Street Fighter 2, and I was stunned to learn this when I was researching, is the key that makes this all tick is that the game feels perfectly balanced. That there is no like good fighter to pick. They all have their relative strengths and weaknesses, but any one of them pitted against any of the others can be an even match.
Yeah.
Right? There's not like an obvious like, oh, well, if you're playing this character, you want to go up against that character because you can exploit this weakness. Because if you make certain games are fun when you can break them, but this would not work. This would feel lopsided and boring.
Yeah.
If you could just do that. The developers did not actually try to do that. They actually just stumbled into a game that was perfectly balanced between all the fighters, which is stunning. That's extremely hard to do.
Oh, interesting. There's so much conflicting information out there, but one of the YouTube docs that I watched in prep for this episode said that in the original testing phase that Zangief was like, that one player was like dominating with Zangief, and so they dumbed down his strength a little bit to make him more balanced with the others.
Well, I'm sure they put some thought into it, but at least what I read made it sound like they didn't really go out of their way, the way that like you think of more modern versions of games like this, where it's like they down to like how many frames of animation a move takes to execute. They'll tweak that stuff at that level of granularity to try and create what is on display here. That yes, you can pick any one character and that can be your guy, and that's perfectly reasonable and a good way to play the game, and that's true of every character on offer.
Yeah. And, just to shout out, like, other things that this game did that are absolutely worth mentioning, the background, the backdrops. Like, it was so cool to see the different versions of, India and Brazil and all this stuff. Then you had the music, which was fantastic. And then, you had voice acting, which had not been a big deal in video games that I remember, at least before this.
No, I mean, putting in voice samples was hard to do because at the time that took up a lot of space on these very limited cartridges. So yeah, you did have some voice samples in here. I'm sure I'll be using them in the episode.
Nice.
The voice and the music was good. Capcom was usually good about music. And in fact, a lot of my favorite video game music is from the 8-bit and 16-bit era. And some of that is nostalgia, but other parts of it are because the technology was limited. And so there was this effort to say, okay, we can't make this music sound like an orchestra. We can't make it sound like a rock band. And we have very limited resources. So it better be real fucking catchy.
Yeah.
And they nailed it. Like the soundtrack to Mega Man 2, for example, on NES, is an all-time great. By far one of the best. The stuff on the SNES for like the Final Fantasy games, this one, they worked really hard to say, if we're going to have to listen to something that's really only like a loop of 90 seconds, sometimes less, it's got to be the best 90 seconds you've ever heard because you're going to hear it over and over again.
Yeah.
And they succeeded at that mission time and again.
Yeah. I think because if I recall correctly, the music isn't tied to the characters, tied to the stage, the place where you fight. And so like that was another consideration of like, oh, I want to fight here because I like, the sound when I fight.
Yeah. And so we should mention, so the game is different where if you play it in a single player, just yourself at home, the quote unquote story mode, you will pick your character and then you will fight the first other 7 main characters one by one in their home turf, followed by actually I think you might. Do you also have to fight a version of yourself?
Not in the original, I don't think.
You may have to. They'll fight a version of you wearing different color clothes, the exact same character, and then you fight the 4 bosses in each of their stages. But if you're playing it 2-player just as a tournament, you got the game is just you pick whoever you want. I pick whoever I want. We select the stage, the place where we want to fight, and then we just go. We just have a fight.
Yeah.
Over and over and over for as long as the Doritos don't run out. And you're right. The locations have so much personality. I mean, as we're recording this, you have the India backdrop for Dalsim behind you with these elephants and stuff, and it's really detailed sprite work.
Yeah. And, true art, these were bit artists that I found out that I can't remember the person's name, but the guy because they had different artists work on different characters, and the guy who was in charge of Chun-Li was obsessed with getting her legs perfectly because, you see her legs so much in different kicks and stuff that she does. And so, he apparently spent so much time on her legs that he almost missed the deadline, but he finally got it right. And I think all these backgrounds, it's just it's beautiful art made, with the limitations, like you said, of the pixelation and the amount of memory that they had access to.
Well, I think limitation is important for art. And it's one of the reasons I think with a lot of video games now, with the rendering power you have on a PS5, you can basically create any visual you want. So the issue then just comes down to creativity, right?
Yeah.
I can do anything I want, so what am I going to do?
Yeah.
In the 16-bit era, you couldn't do anything you wanted, and I find it more interesting. There's a lot of modern indie games that go back to a pixel art aesthetic, and I always love it because it's you did this with one hand tied behind your back.
Yeah.
Right? It's really cool to see what you come up with when you're limited to this color palette of limited colors and these larger blocky pixels to create. How do you create the room full of elephants or the banks of the Amazon?
Yeah.
Right? They're neat looking. It's really cool to see. Look, I did this with only this limited set of tools. It's great.
Yeah. No, the art in this game was so much bigger, and it felt to me had more an impact on me than art had in really any other game before this. I liked a lot of the character design and stuff, but specifically I think the backgrounds, Ryu's stage with the sunset and all the background characters moving and the elephants, the trunks going up and all that stuff. I just that made this game feel more alive to me. And because it was largely a static game, you're in one room per fight, but the room itself was brimming with life.
I think that's a good point because you're spending a lot of time with this game and it's addictive, right? That gameplay loop is really addictive. So you're going to spend a lot of time seeing essentially the same 12 screens over and over again, and they do so much to make those screens memorable and distinctive in a way that Street Fighter 1, watching it's so bland and so generic, and so forgettable. This really pops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you have, I should say, maybe now's a good time to kind of run through the character roster and talk a little bit about each one.
Well, let's start with, because you didn't answer, because I didn't ask, we got on something else, but who's your character?
I would gravitate towards Blanca. So we could start with Blanca. He's an unusual place to start, but Blanca he's from Brazil, and he's basically the Incredible Hulk / Tarzan.
Yes.
He's this, feral... monster man mutated by experiments or something, and he's got this set of electric eel powers. So you could, in addition to all of his grabs and him being able to kind of roll into a ball and zoom across the screen into you, he could make him electrify his skin so that if you tried to punch him or kick him, you make physical contact, you would get electrocuted and then go flying off.
Yeah.
And I always found that, I tended to be a little more defensive. So, as a defense, you go, kind of turtle up into this electrical ball.
Yeah.
And if you did it at the right moment, the other person would be too far along in whatever they were doing to lose that momentum and stop. So that was my guy.
Nice. And then he also had his other move was, I don't remember what it's called, but he would fly across the screen while doing a flip, and just ram right into you.
Yeah, I mean, and they had a few other special moves as well, but those are, I think, the two most distinctive ones. And as I recall from his ending in the lore, like, it is very much Tarzan, right? He finds his mom.
Finds his real mom, yeah.
Or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Weird version of that in the movie, as I recall, right? He gets, like, mutated during the plot of the movie.
Yeah, I got so much to talk about the movie, too.
Okay, we'll save that for the end. I've only seen it, like, once, so.
So let's talk about the twins, Ken and Ryu, who were the two heroes from the first game, the holdover. Eventually, in the iterations later, they would divulge and be different characters to some extent, but in this game, they were basically mirror images of each other, save for the actual image.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single difference between the two of them in their move set. Everything about is literally just, do you want to pick the character that has blonde hair or the one that has black hair?
Yeah. Yes.
Which, again, this is the one misstep in an otherwise, I think, pretty impeccable game. It feels like, well, you gave me, this roster of characters, but two of them are duplicates.
Yeah.
Of each other.
Yeah.
It is a bit of a bummer, but it is a good character, regardless of which one you pick in terms of its the fighting.
And unlike, I think those were the only two characters in the game, if I recall correctly from the Super Nintendo instruction booklet, where they had 3 special moves. And maybe the characters had more special moves that were in the instruction booklet, but like every character had 2, but they had 3. They had the Haduoken,
Haduoken!
The fireball, the dragon punch,
Haduoken!
And they had the spinning helicopter kick.
Those are the ones I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they have any others. I think the other characters have more moves than that. They also have various kinds of holds. So if you get up close to your opponent, you can grab them and throw them,
or do like something where you're hitting them constantly. Blanca would bite them, and Dhalsim would do the yoga noogie. I remember is what it was called.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's what Ken and Ryu do. They're karate guys, and again, a holdover from they are the main characters from Street Fighter 1, so it makes sense for them to be there.
And their storyline is that they have the same master, and that's why they have the same moves.
Right. And I think is Ryu at the end of his quest, if he beats M. Bison, he's like, I must go on to the next challenge. Like, he's like punching a waterfall.
Yeah.
And like, he's, whatever is next on the horizon.
Yeah.
And Ken, like, his wife comes up and hugs him or something.
Yeah, I think Ken
gets married.
Yeah.
So they are a little bland compared to some of the other characters, but yes, important parts of the roster.
Sure. You got Dhalsim, of course. And I didn't know this, but originally they were going to make him like 6 or 8 arms, like Ganesh. And so they nixed that. But he was based on a character from a 1974 movie called Shanglong. Or no, I'm sorry, that's a different thing. I can't remember the name of the movie, but it was a 1974 film, and it was rated X. And it had a guy, one of the fighters had a long beard, and he could, when he punched you, his arm would stretch like twice its own length. And like that's apparently what inspired Dhalsim.
Yeah, this one was probably my second most used character because he looks. They sort of make him look like Gandhi.
Yeah,
with like Stretch Armstrong arms.
And yes, Gandhi meets a witch doctor kind of look. Yeah.
Yeah, again, with me being kind of the defensive fighting style I would have, this was one where he has this incredible reach, so it would be hard for your opponent to get close because if you fire off these super long rubbery arm punches, they don't do much damage, but you can keep a guy at bay pretty well with them.
Yeah.
But he also has Yoga Fire.
Yoga Fire!
He can shoot fireballs out of his mouth.
But if you do it just a little bit different, you get Yoga Flame, which can be good, but if you meant to fire and you flame, they can come over the top and jump kick you.
Right. Some of these, definitely, like the button inputs for some of these are very close to one another.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure they want that to happen. There is some level of, like, mistakes being fun in games. And I think a lot of games miss that, where it's like, sometimes if things go wrong and you still have fun, then the game succeeds, right?
Yeah.
Like, think about games where you have to be stealthy. In a game where you have to sneak around, if getting caught is a bummer and it kind of ends the fun, that's no good. But if getting caught is just as much fun as sneaking around, then you're okay. And Street Fighter 2 kind of has that. It's that, like, oops is okay. It's still hilarious. But that's awesome. Let's talk about E Honda a bit, because I know that's your guy.
Yep, E Honda was. There's something about just the way he jump kicks and things that I don't know. It just like he can't jump as high as Chun-Li or Blanca, but he can jump higher than most of the other characters. and that mid-range jump for some reason always worked for me. And he's, as I said, he's a sumo wrestler, so he's, you know, big guy, and he's shirtless the whole time. And you know, he's like, "Oop, boy," when he like hits you, and then he's got the mini hands where he can stand still. In the original game, he could just stand still and do it, but in later games you could move forward and do it, and it was essentially you hit the button as fast as you could, and then his hands would go into this like ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da kind of thing.
Yeah, that is, I think, one of my favorite bits of animation work in the game is his hand, and Chun-Li has a similar thing with her kick, but his hand just flying back and forth in front of him. It's almost like the Bart and Lisa thing. You know, I'm going to start swinging my fists,
Yeah.
and if you happen to get close, and you know, it's that thing where like a kid is just like, I'm going to throw my arm back and forth, and if you just get close enough, it's going to slap you.
Yeah.
That's what this is. It's very funny, and it is a useful move for sure, because again, holds people at bay when used correctly. But I think he could be like fast as well, right? Is there some way he can kind of rocket from one side of the screen to the other?
It's the same thing that Blanca has. Can go if you hold back for 2 seconds and forward and punch, then he'll like fly across the screen. And again, these were elements they were taking from different movies. Like, I can't remember, the name of it, but my notes are way too scattered. But there was a kung fu movie where, in the 70s that's, I think, they said Tarantino's favorite, where people are, like, flying and doing supernatural stuff. And they were like, oh, let's make Blanca and E Honda have these, like, flying things. And, of course, then Chun-Li's helicopter kick and all these other, you know, anti-gravity moves. Yeah,
we should mention there's a lot of moves in here. This is not meant to be realistic.
Yeah, it's very cartoonish.
This is it's super cartoonish, martial arts, right? People throwing fireballs, they're doing these like kicks through the air that, as you said, defy gravity and physics. But it's okay because it's all in the name of fun. It's you know, I don't think anyone's tried to make a very realistic.
And you know, Mortal Kombat did that, and that's cool. But like, I loved the aspect of Street Fighter. It felt like I was playing, like I was in charge of a cartoon.
It has big Dragon Ball Z energy for sure.
Absolutely.
I'm sure. I don't know which came first, but this is definitely one is an influence on the other. There's no question.
Oh, sure.
Because, you know, I mean, Dragon Ball Z is nothing but this as a cartoon, right? It's just animated fights between people throwing energy balls. So we've done, who's next? Chun-Li. Let's talk about Chun-Li.
Oh, let's talk about Chun-Li. You know, the one woman in the game, and she wasn't actually the first woman in a fighting game, but she was by far the most popular. And she apparently brought a lot of women to Street Fighter 2 who may not have wanted to go there without this character existing.
Yeah, and women are not well represented in games generally. I mean, it's getting better. Mortal Kombat, since then they've added a few Street Fighter characters. There's like Cammy, I think, is one of them. A few other women. Mortal Kombat's had more, I think. But yeah, I mean, even though she's the only female in the game, she's one of the coolest characters, I think. Just in terms of her moves, she's very spry. As you mentioned, they spent a lot of time on them gams to make them kick right.
And they are deadly gams.
Yeah. She can also do that thing like E Honda does, where like the leg is just flying back and forth and back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah.
And it will mess you up if you get close.
And she is the highest jumping character you can play in the original game. Vega can outjump her when Street Fighter Turbo when you can play him, but as far as the original 8, she was the highest off the ground. Yeah. Again, mastering that was such a part of the game, right? Of like, this person can jump higher than me. How am I going to counter that? Or I am the person that can jump higher. How am I going to exploit it? Yeah. It really fun in terms of figuring out that balance and how each person can counter the other. And her deal is she's a Chinese Interpol agent. Yep. As I recall. Yeah, and she's got a personal vendetta against M. Bison, who is responsible for her father's murder. I remember at the end they kind of do the bit where she's like, I'm finally taking off my karate clothes, and now I'm just in jeans and a t-shirt, and life is good. Nice. I seem to recall that's her ending. Zangief, you mentioned him. Yeah. So originally his first name was Vodka. That's actually true. You mentioned Punch-Out before. So there's a character in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, I think it's called Soda Popinski. Yeah. I believe that character's original name was also something vodka based, and they decided, this is for kids. We can't have a vodka character. So they made it Soda Popinski. That's hilarious. But yeah, Zangief, Soviet giant bear of a man. Yeah. And that was his backstory, is that he wrestled bears in Russia, and that's how he got to be such a good wrestler. He's I think the
biggest and burliest character.
And the strong, like his punch takes more hit damage than the other character's punch in the original 8.
Yeah, he hits harder, but I believe he's the slowest.
He's slower, and he can't jump for anything. Like he can barely get off the ground. He's the lowest jumper of the 8.
I think he also has no ranged attacks, if I recall correctly.
Nope.
He has to get in close with you, to wrestle you. But he had this like crazy pile drivers and stuff. He would grab you and smash you to the ground.
Well, his moves are extremely similar to Hagar, I think was his name from Final Fight.
Well, Final Fight was developed, I think it was going to be a Street Fighter game, and then they made it its own thing.
Yeah.
Because it was a different style of game. It was a beat 'em up, not a tournament fighter.
Yeah. But if you and they're different games, but if you played as Hagar and you played as Zangief in Street Fighter, you're like, man, these are extremely similar characters.
Yeah. I'm sure they share some code.
Yeah.
For sure. And of course, we would be remiss if we did not mention Zangief's really, really funny appearance in Wreck-It Ralph.
Yeah. Good call. I forgot about that.
Wreck-It Ralph is, of course, a story about a Disney movie about a character who's sort of a Donkey Kong-esque arcade character. And it's like Toy Story, but with video game characters. What do they do? When it's quitting time, what do they all go do on their downtime? And Wreck-It Ralph goes to this support group for video game villains, and Zangief is one of the people there who's trying to teach him how to, just because you are a bad guy does not mean you are a bad guy. It's very funny.
I'm Zangief, I'm bad guy.
Hi, Zangief.
Hi, Zangief. I relate to you, Ralph. When I hit bottom, I was crushing man's skull like sparrow egg between my thighs. And I think, why do you have to be so bad, Zangief? Why can't you be more like good guy? Then I have moment of clarity. If Zangief is good guy, who'll crush man's skull like sparrow's egg between thighs? And I say, Zangief, you are bad guy. But this does not mean you're bad guy.
And Zangief in the movie was a big source of comedic relief as well. Like he's kind of always pushed in that comedy role.
Yeah, well, they had a callback for him, I think, as well, when like Ralph goes to the bar and he's trying to find something in the Lost and Found, and he finds a pair of Zangief's underwear. He calls that out. Yeah, very, very funny appearance, and I think he says some catchphrases from the game as well. So that is Zangief, and I think he has the best ending. Right, do you remember his ending in the game?
No, I don't.
Okay, so he after he wins the big tournament, they show him dancing with Mikhail Gorbachev.
Yes, that's what it was. Yes. And he's like part of the continuity of the lore of the game, like Mikhail Gorbachev. Nice.
There was this weird thing where he's not the only world leader to appear in a game. If you recall, there was a code in NBA Jam that allowed you to play as Bill Clinton.
Oh, yeah, that rings a bell. Nice.
Now, if you could play as Gorbachev in the tournament, that would be cool.
That'd be a heck of a... Yeah. Especially if a fireball came out at the spot on his head or something.
Glasnost!
And then I think we've got everyone except Guile for the original 8.
Yes, I forgot. Yes. Yeah. Sonic Boom.
Yeah.
Army Man.
Yeah, one of the most... I think of all the sounds in the game, I think Sonic Boom is what people... Like, I think that's, if you had to pick one iconic soundbite for this game, like Sonic Boom, just instantly, there's nothing else you think of other than Street Fighter 2.
Sonic Boom!
Yeah, and of course he becomes the protagonist of the movie.
Sure.
When that comes around. Jean-Claude Van Damme playing an American character somehow. And he had that cool stage. It was like it was like a runway with a giant jet fighter on it.
Yeah, and a bunch of other Air Force or Army guys or whatever, and USO women, that kind of stuff. His two moves were, of course, Sonic Boom, hold back for 2 seconds, forward for 2 seconds, and punch, or the flash kick, which is hold down for 2 seconds and then up and kick, and you do a whoosh, like a roundhouse kind of thing.
I mean, again, to go back to the beginning, you can tell how much time we put into this because you still remember all of these button inputs.
Oh, I'll never
30
forget them.
years later.
Well, and I still have a Super Nintendo Mini that I still play the game. I played it just in preparation for this.
So it's all coming back to you, I'm sure, right?
I honestly, dude, I mean, I don't have the best memory in the world, but like when I made it my mission to get as good at Street Fighter 2 as I could because I wanted to go to that arcade and I wanted to be the winner who didn't have to pay for rounds. And so like I still remember seeing the instruction booklet like in my mind.
And then we have our 4 bosses. We have Balrog, who is basically just this boxer from Las Vegas. Which, he has a cool stage as well. It's kind of this cool rendering of this neon blue Vegas.
His stage is great. And he's similar to Zangief. He doesn't have any range attacks, but what's interesting about him, he's the only character in the game that doesn't kick.
Right, it's all punches.
All punches, but man, those punches hurt.
Again, they've found this way to take away all of these other tools that some of the other characters have, and he's just as viable as an opponent as any of the others are.
And if he beat you 2 times, his ending pose, because they had ending poses, he would like muscle up and his shirt would rip off, and like whoever digitized him was the thirstiest gay man in the world. Like he has this body, like this digital body that is like perfect.
They definitely, I mean, they're not digitized in the way like Mortal Kombat characters were literally filmed actors and they just made the image low res.
Yeah.
But here it's all like, hand-drawn animated stuff. And they all have such personality. The next one I was going to talk about was Vega, who again also has a lot of like, there's a lot of posing. He has a mask that can be knocked off, so you have him with and without it. And he does this weird thing where he climbs all over this like chain link fence in the background.
Yeah.
And can really mess you up from like way up high. He can like jump off the screen and come down with his claws and just cut you up.
He is by far the highest jumper, and him and Chun-Li are the only 2 that can jump off the back. Like once you've scrolled to the right or to the left, they can really jump off the wall and then increase their jump off of that.
He was one, I think, when I was playing solo, was probably the one that gave me the most trouble.
So hard
as an opponent. Because he's very, very fast, and he hits really hard. So it's very hard for you to get a hit in. It's hard to block him. It's hard to know where he's going to be next. Yeah, I think probably by far the toughest enemy in the game in terms of its AI. I guess a human opponent maybe I'd have a chance, but yeah, that was always where I'd use up the most continues.
100%. No, he was, and I think originally in the Famicom version of the game, the first one that Balrog was actually called M. Bison, Vega was called Balrog, and M. Bison was called Vega, and they switched.
Yeah, they switched that up for. Yeah, I think in some countries it was just different, and I'm not sure why.
Well, the reason it was different in the United States was because the black boxer from Vegas was named M. Bison, and they were afraid that Mike Tyson would like come after them for likeness, so they switched it up.
Huh. Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So then we have Sagat,
yep,
who left over from the first game, just big, tall, Thai guy with an eye patch.
Yeah. He can do the tiger, which is basically a fireball, but unlike Ryun Ken, his could do up top, or he could crouch down and do the tiger, so it could come at you both ways.
Yeah, and that I remember that being very tricky because usually you're used to like, well, if he does it, I know the timing so I can jump over it or duck under it as need be. But here, you kind of have this 50-50 shot of whichever one was coming at you, and it would be much harder to adjust your defense to it accordingly.
Yeah. And he had the Tiger Uppercut, which was essentially the same move as the Dragon Punch from Ken Ryu.
Right, this like huge uppercut that would send you flying. He also, I think, had one of the coolest stages. He's in this like standing in front of this enormous statue. I wouldn't even know how to describe it.
And the statue's not standing on its feet; it's lying on its side. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's evocative for sure.
Yeah.
Like there is a little sense of like. It's a small world, but there is a sense of like I'm going to different places. I'm seeing different types of environments that match the culture of the location. And then last we have our villain, M. Bison of the Shadaloo organization.
Yeah,
who looks like he's like a generalissimo in how he appears.
Yeah, and he's not the tallest, he's not the biggest, but man, he is fast and he is deadly.
I think he has the most moves. He has all these different kinds of, like, very fast I don't think he can teleport, but he can move across the screen very fast.
He can jump in ways that no one else can. He can just kind of go from one side to the other. And his biggest thing, I don't remember the name of it, is where he basically turns himself into a hurling fireball. So he kind of takes the power of E Honda going across the screen and Yoga Fire and combines them. And if it touches you, you set on fire and get knocked out.
Yeah, I mean, they had to make him, if he's the end boss, they got to make it as hard as they can. And it's tricky. I think he's hard, but he doesn't feel unfair. None of it feels like cheap.
Yeah.
Which can, that's when you want to throw your controller, when it's like, well, come on. This is,
Yeah,
I can accept a challenge that's fair, but
I think, similar to you, I think I had to continue more on Vega, but before I eventually figured out how to beat him than I did M. Bison.
Yeah, I do think Vega is harder than M. Bison for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, there we go. There's our run of the 12 characters.
One last thing on M. Bison, I believe he was the only stage in that original game that you interacted with the stage a little bit. Remember, he had 2 statues on either side, and if you got hit into one, it cracked.
Right. But I don't think that did extra damage. It was just aesthetic, right?
Yeah, it didn't do any extra damage, but it was the only stage where something in the background actually was affected by one of the characters.
I mean, this would go on, iterating between different fighting games where the backgrounds become integral to the fighting. Like, I can exploit the fact that I'm standing by this object. If this guy comes close, I can grab this thing and throw it at him or whatever. Yeah. So, did you stick with the franchise when Street Fighter 3 finally came along, or any of these other ones?
I definitely got Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which was the version where you could play against yourself. So, versus, we could both be Guile or whatever, and you could also play as the 4 bosses. And then there was Street Fighter 2 Alpha, which I think I played, but I wasn't super excited about. I get that they were, there was more stuff you could do with more characters, and I don't know, the thrill was kind of gone for me at that point. I was more into games like Primal Rage, Killer Instinct at that point.
Yeah, I think my love for fighting games kind of begins and ends at Street Fighter 2. I've enjoyed the Smash Brothers games where you play as different Nintendo franchise characters, because that changes up the formula a lot for, what a fighting game can be. It's different enough. So many other fighting games are really just like we said before, it's just, okay, here's your roster of characters and they're all different and it's some version of this, but it's like you just can't, often imitated, never duplicated.
Yeah. To me, the closest version was Capcom when they did Marvel versus Capcom. And I thought that was really cool because you could Marvel characters in Street Fighter, then you also had Mega Man and the other some other Capcom things. And that was, I wasn't as obsessed with the game as much as I was impressed that I could play all these characters in a fighting format.
And the innovation for Marvel versus Capcom was just having a roster of 70 characters.
Yeah, it was huge.
As opposed to 12. The other one that, and interesting again with that sort of arms race, is you had a Mortal Kombat game that was Mortal Kombat versus DC. So you had Mortal Kombat characters versus Superman and Batman.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You put them against each other. And then they got real weird with Mortal Kombat where they said, we're going to have all these Mortal Kombat characters, and then for DLC or unlockable characters, we're just going to put in some random-ass people in here. So it's you're playing all these Mortal Kombat characters versus Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th. He's just in there for no apparent reason. The Xenomorph or the Predator. They just started adding all of this IP into their games because it was just fun. Because people were like, "Yeah, that's who I want to play as. I don't give a shit about this."
RoboCop's in that game, right? And the Terminator,
right? They put in RoboCop, the Terminator, and it's just make a game that's that. Make a game, and then they started coming out with things like Multiverses recently, where it's literally "Hey, what if the most random things in the world fought each other?" And then it ends up feeling less special somehow because it's just oh. You can see okay, I guess I'm playing Bugs Bunny versus Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, which is interesting, but it's all just a bunch of button presses. You can immediately see what's under the hood, and it's kind of okay, well, it doesn't feel like I'm being Bugs Bunny.
Yeah.
You wanted to set aside some time to talk about the movie, which I think
if you don't mind, that movie is, I think, worth talking about.
Please go.
So it was first-time director who was like earned his right to direct. It was Steven D'Souza. He had written Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, and he'd written these amazing scripts, but he never directed. And somehow he got to get his directorial debut with Street Fighter 2, which they put so much money into. Jean-Claude Van Damme plays an American, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but was probably on coke the entire movie.
Probably.
Raul Julia, who's not known for action, played the only acting in the movie that was actually worthwhile as M. Bison. His fights
his
were
last role too.
It was his last role before he died. Way too young. He wasn't that old. And then
and it wasn't that long after the Addams Family either. He was pretty young and doing well.
Yeah, no, the movie came out in 94. It was Addams Family, I think, was 92.
Yeah, it was like Addams Family Values, and then this, and then unfortunately, he was gone.
My father was the village magistrate. A simple man with a simple code, justice. He gathered the few people that he could to stand against you. You and your bullies were driven back by farmers with pitchforks. My father saved his village at the cost of his own life. You had him shot as you ran away. A hero at 1,000 paces.
I'm sorry. I don't remember any of it.
You don't remember?
For you, the day Bison graced your village was the most important day of your life. But for me, it was Tuesday.
Then Ming-Na Wen played Chun-Li, now famous for the live adaptation of Mulan. And then Kylie Minogue.
Oh no, she's the original Mulan.
What's that?
She's the original voice of Mulan.
Oh well, there you go. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, was she in the live action remake? They put her in there somewhere.
Yeah, she was in there too. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Nice. She's been in a million things. She's so good.
And then the weirdest casting, Kylie Minogue playing Cammy.
Right, I forgot about that. That Kylie Minogue is in that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with turning this into a movie, well, this came up when we talked about the Ninja Turtles too, which is like trying to adapt a video game into a movie, which is like, it shouldn't be this hard.
Right, yeah.
Like, people adapt things all the time. Why is it such a fail every time?
And I really went to the theater expecting, and I don't know why, I was 13, but I was really hoping that Street Fighter the movie was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, equivalent of Street Fighter, just like an extremely good movie, well done. And it was campy and weird and sometimes a little serious, but a lot of times comedic, but not funny comedic. It was a real mess.
I think it falls into the so bad it's good category. I'd put it in there.
Agreed. 100%.
Yeah. Definitely not a good film by any stretch of the imagination, but there is enjoyment to be had at its expense. I know they've done other Street Fighter. They've done animated things and probably manga and stuff. I don't know if any of that stuff is good.
So I was not an anime kid at all, and I'm really still not huge into anime. Every once in a while, I see something. But the Street Fighter animated series and movie that came out 95 or whatever it was, 96. I remember binge watching that in a time before binge watching was even a term with a friend of mine, and I was enthralled. It is. I would love to rewatch it now. I didn't have the time to rewatch it for this, but it was dark and gritty, and all the characters did what they actually did in the video games, as opposed to the movie where they rarely did what they did in the video games. And that animated series, I remember it as being very good.
I have to take your word for it. I don't remember seeing any of the other. I didn't watch any of these other versions of it or transmedia property stuff. From Street Fighter. Any closing thoughts on Street Fighter before we call it? I think we've done it justice for sure.
100%. One thing that's interesting is the ability to do combos in the game was not intentional. It was actually the creators thought it was a flaw. but they were so pushed for the deadline that they just left it in. But if they had more time, they would have made it to where you couldn't do combos, because combos wasn't even really a term at that point. They accidentally invented what would be the staple of fighting genres forever.
Right, that ability to chain these moves together for greater impact.
Yeah.
And again, exploit the timing. You're right. Yeah, that was an accident that they left it in the game, for sure. What about your emotional connection to it? Anything you feel, here we are 30 years later still talking about this just monster of a game.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's similar to what we talk about with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie, is that the perfect storm of everything happened. You had these video game creators who were very hungry to make something great. Then everything that had come before it had really set the stage for them. And, they had the money at the time because of the success of other games. And it just all kind of hit at the right... Because when they released it in Japan, it wasn't the hit at first that it would become. It was a hit in America and then became a hit in Japan, even though they got it before we did. And it just... I don't know if it hit the culture at the right time or what it was, but it became one of the most popular and remembered video games of all time. And when I opened my Christmas present, or I don't remember when I got it, but I remember opening a present and it was Street Fighter 2, and I just lost it. I don't think I left my room for 4 days. I just stayed in and played. I was so obsessed. And, anytime I had a friend over, if we didn't have anything else to do, let's play some Street Fighter.
Yeah, for me, I think the emotional connection to it is all social. I don't remember when I first got my hands on it, but my vague memory is one of my best friends had it, and I remember going over to his house to play it, and then I had to get it. But I loved playing video games with my friends, but a lot of games were either single player only, which meant somebody watches and one person plays, or the two-player experience was maybe, again, it was a handoff like with Mario, where like, okay, I play, then you play.
Yeah.
And very rarely were games we play against each other or together against the computer, but not like this. This was like, you and me are going to play together as this, sporting event, essentially, where we play off against each other with, a very large number of potential combinations between the two characters, which meant for a lot of possible playtime.
Yeah.
And to me, this game just is afternoons with my best friends, whittle away at their houses or mine. Just endless bouts of this game. And just the fun of watching these virtual action figures punch each other.
Hell yeah.
That's the warm memory I have of it, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Whether it was at the arcade or at my home or at someone else's home, playing with them, like friendships were forged and some were ended because of this. Like I remember one guy got so mad because he could beat everyone, but he couldn't beat me when I was the Honda, no matter who he played. And he'd try every character, and I don't know why. I had his number, and he got so mad he just left.
There's probably thousands of stories like that for this game. Well, I just want to thank you for coming on and suggesting we cover this topic, because, yeah, it's as like fun video game throwback stuff goes. I think so many people have played this game and can relate to these experiences and, know these characters and their movesets by heart all these years later from just pure muscle memory. And that's just something, good media can do, whether it's music or movies or video games. They really can be a time machine to take you back to a great part of your childhood.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on Street Fighter before we wrap it up?
I think the only thing left that I could say is Sonic Boom!
There you go. All right. Well, with that, Rich, you want to talk about where people can find you?
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. Find me at Rich Baker Coaching on Instagram or Facebook if you're interested in improv classes or you want to see some of my improv shows or different comedy things that I have on YouTube. You can find everything through all that. And if you are interested in the class, first drop-in is for free, so you can just check it out. It is the most fun you'll have on Zoom.
There you go. And if you like this podcast, of course, do all of the support things you do for podcasts, like, rate, subscribe, tell people, all of that stuff. And if you have feedback on this or any of our other recent episodes, please send tweet it to @NostalgiaPod. It's also on Instagram. And normally this is where I would talk about what's coming up next, but I'm kind of recording a couple of episodes, hopefully here and there. I'm not sure about the scheduling, so I'm not sure if this is coming out before something else or after something else, but I'll announce whatever it is. So we'll see what's coming next. I'm sure it's something fun from the 80s or 90s. Why wouldn't it be?
Hell yeah.
So there you go. And until next time, that is one more entry in the Nostalgium Arcanum.
Riddle me this. Do you or do you not think that Zangief waxes?
No way, look at the guy. He looks like a Yeti.
I don't know. I mean, if the fur were confined to his chest, I might agree, but look at those two very specific tuffets of shin hair poking out of his boots. That does not just happen, Ralph. That is a choice.
You're totally right, kid. He's baby smooth everywhere else.
I rest my case.
My mind is blown.